from the dead.
Read the Bible, you'll find out that God's not too happy with what's going on around us.
Redeem the time, because the days are evil.
The Bible has not changed.
Boldly proclaim the restoration and preservation of Christian values in America.
Satan has brainwashed a whole nation.
As goes the church, so goes the nation.
Nobody's convicted of anything anymore.
And now, here's Last Call with your host, B.J. Edwards.
Every Saturday morning, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going on 6 years. Where have you been? Where have you been? 6 years. I'm tired of being the best kept secret in America. Stop it. No, start it. The COVID figures don't lie, or do they? Are suspected cases and COVID deaths really on the rise, skyrocketing? Or is it just because we're going to have a vaccination coming up here shortly and we need to set the groundwork for it? This morning, we're going to be consulting with expert Dr. Douglas G. Frank, who has promised to add clarity and meaning to the COVID-19 count. You can watch us on YouTube, and please subscribe. Listen on the internet or just listen by phone. If you just want to listen by phone, 605-475-0010 or 641-741-0816. If you want to talk to our guest, myself or Mr. Anderson, 302-202-1110. We've already got some callers on the line. Saturday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern till noon. We always start off with a quote. I love this from Mark Twain. It's incredible. Mark Twain is just incredible and very succinct, but hits to the point. What did Mark Twain say? I think he must have been talking about COVID. Figures don't lie, but liars do figure. Wow. I received an incredible email this week, and I hope to get a chance to read that to you later on in the program, from one of our last call regulars, which I hope, again, I get a chance to read. It's quite telling, and I'm sure a lot of you can really relate to what's going on. Wow. Who can you trust? The figures that are out there are just incredible. They're all over the place. I know if you've listened before, I had mentioned in March that I went to the CDC, and I want to do a comparison between the flu deaths last year and the COVID deaths the end of this year, which we're approaching. I had issues because when I went there, they gave me a range. I think it was 26,000 to 60,000, something like that. And I'm scratching my head and going, what do you mean? What do you mean a range? I want figures. But what the CDC did was estimate the deaths based upon limited information. I don't know whether they're still doing that or not. I don't know whether they've hired new staff or, where's that information coming from? That'd be one of the questions Dr. Frank might be able to answer for us. And I had somebody call me this morning before the show, and they said they're going to be publishing a booklet, a magazine with facts and, importantly, timely content. And she's looking for accurate numbers with regards to the COVID-19. Who can you trust? Man, speaking of trust, it looks like a federal panel of outside experts Thursday of this week endorsed the coronavirus vaccine from Pfizer and BioNTech and recommended to the Food and Drug Administration that they move forward with emergency authorization. I think the vote was 17-4. I don't know who these people are that are okaying this. I have no idea who they are. For safety and efficacy. The safety and the efficacy of the vaccine outweigh the risk. The fear of COVID outweigh the risks, the proper procedures. The fear of COVID outweigh proper procedures, in my humble opinion. And this is for use in individuals 16 and older. Executives from UPS and FedEx assured lawmakers that they are ready and prepared to complete one of the biggest logistic challenges in recent history, devoting 660 million COVID-19 vaccine doses nationwide, enough for the required 2 doses per person. I know a lot of you haven't heard that. I'm sorry, did I tell you that I was in a meeting this past Thursday? And I learned that as many as 6 people who were in the Pfizer COVID-19 test group died from the vaccine, or just they were due. Their time was up. At least another 2 have developed Bell palsy symptoms. But of course, I'm sure you've already heard that, right? On the news. So who do we believe, my good friends? I did some research with the Pfizer deaths, and Reuters came up. Of all the organization, Reuters, and they call this information partially false that I just gave to you. Here's what everyone seems to agree on. 6 people that were in the study of 600 did die. And a couple of participants did require Bell palsy. By the way, Bell palsy is a type of facial paralysis. That ought to excite you. That results in a temporary inability to control facial muscles on the affected side of the face. The Reuters article notwithstanding, please keep in mind that the average time to develop a viable vaccine is from 5 to 15 years. And we've got a COVID vaccine for a virus, and they've never developed a vaccine for a virus, ever. I think AIDS is a virus, isn't it? Anyway, a cure, a vaccine, I'm talking not a cure, a vaccine for the virus in just a few months. I asked my general practitioner doctor the other day his thoughts on COVID, asking about hydrochloroquine and the vaccine. And he said that he thought he would go ahead and get the vaccine. And he thought the hydrochloroquine was just a political thing. Told me all I needed to know right there. I thanked him for being another test volunteer. Looked at me kind of funny. And to let me know when he got the vaccine, because I wanted to see firsthand whether I might be interested in getting that COVID fix. Yes, my doctor is a test rat, if you will. I probably ought to be looking for a new doctor, right?
I would look for a new doctor.
Yeah, for more reasons than one. He may not be around when I need him. I want you to understand something, folks. And this is critical. This is critical. The government never gives back anything that it takes. And it's taken a lot of power, a lot of freedom, and a lot of liberty from every individual. They're not going to give that back. People are thinking that once the vaccine becomes successful, we can take our masks off. Don't count on it. Don't count on it. Read an article the other day where experts in India are baffled by a mystery illness in India. Do you think there'll be a COVID-20? 21?
2021?
Over 50% of the population of America is dependent on the government for their livelihood, which in essence means that they are enslaved to the state daddy. 94% of DC voters voted for Biden. The difference between a slave and a prisoner? Is it a slave has accepted their position to the point that they will serve master and even depend on him? This is unlike the prisoner who will do whatever they can to escape. If you give a prisoner a spoon, if you give a slave a spoon, he'll eat with it. If you give a prisoner a spoon, what do? They'll try to dig their way out of the prison, right? Unless, of course, the loyal slave tells master the prisoner is trying to escape. Just saying, folks, you need to get your spoons out. You need to get your spoons out. This is an opportunity. COVID is an opportunity to, number one, see what has happened to America. See how blind we've been, how obedient we are, how dependent we are on the government, not necessarily for subsistence, although, like I said, 50% or more are, but for how to think. Government-run schools teach our children that life has no meaning, morals are relative, man is the measure of all things, and the state is your daddy. And we pay handsomely for that, by the way. I've been running across some great Americans that are in the battle. I think of Dr. Pam Popper, who I had the privilege of seeing this week as well. I keep busy, folks. I keep very busy. I've also talked to my congressman this week, my senators. Well, that won't do any good, BJ. You don't know that. You don't know that. I come from a sales background. You know what the greatest error is in sales? It's the error of omission. It's that employer or that potential sales candidate that you went, boy, it's late today. I just don't think I'm going to do it. I just don't think I can do it. And I can guarantee you from experience that is the one that you need to approach, because there's your sale. And every no is just a yes waiting to bloom. Don't be afraid to contact your congressman, your community leaders, your neighbors, and now your family. We're so divided. Don't be afraid to tell people the truth. Please. It's costing this great nation. We're a nation that doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It's been confused. When we get into arguments with liberals, these are the arguments that we're having. The argument is, how much of the truth am I willing to sacrifice to make them happy? That is what the arguments are about. The arguments aren't about right or wrong. The argument's about how much I'm going to give up of the truth of natural laws, physical and spiritual, how much of that I'm going to give up to man, to humanist. Those are what all the arguments are about. And when they're talking about compromise, it's the same. That's exactly what we're talking about. How much are you going to compromise what you believe in, which is true? The truth is self-evident, folks. It is self-evident. It's in nature. You walk off a cliff, whoosh, those are physical laws, and you're going down. And there's spiritual laws that relate to the family. One man, one woman, lifelong, committed, monogamous relationship. There is a reason that is and does make a nation successful or unsuccessful. If you looked at the true history of nations and you looked at the family and how they treated the family, did they lift it up or did they put it down? You'll find in every case that once the family went bye-bye, the nation soon followed. We have a great guest coming up. I'm really looking forward to talking to Dr. Frank. I've had several conversations with him. I love where he's coming from. But we need the truth, Dr. Frank. This is BJ Edwards along Mr. Anderson, your last call. When we come back, Dr. Douglas Frank. Thank you very much.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with BJ Edwards.
And we are back. Last Call every Saturday morning. I am so sick and tired of the inconsistent information that I have to deal with. I have to make decisions with. I have one side that says the other side is totally wrong, and vice versa. One side that says there actually isn't a virus. There is no COVID virus. It does not exist. No one's died of the COVID. Period. The other side is saying COVID is behind every tree. It's under every bed. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So what are we supposed to believe? Welcome to the Last Call, Dr. Frank. Easy question for you. What are we supposed to believe, sir?
Pleasure to be here, Mr. Edwards. If you were to fall off a cliff, you mentioned that earlier. If you were to fall off a cliff and die at the bottom, it isn't gravity that killed you. It's the complications. It's complications due to the gravity that kills you.
Okay.
And it's the same with COVID. It's not COVID that kills you. It's the way your body reacts to it. The way your body reacts to it that kills you.
Okay. I want you to give us a little bit. You're going to give us some figures and you're going to give us some facts.
Sure.
But why should we pay attention to you? Who are you?
I'm a scientist. I've been doing science aggressively for most of my life. For about 40 years, I've been doing science. And I own a small business, make scientific instruments for companies around the world. And I also am a teacher at the Schilling School for Gifted Children in Cincinnati. It's a school that teaches some of the brightest youngsters in our country. So that's who I am. That's what I do. And one of my hobbies, but it's also part of my vocation, is that I like to model things and I like to make predictions. And so I like to use mathematics to do that. And I use those examples in my classes, in some of my advanced classes. So, for example, over the years, I've modeled epidemics when they come up. We modeled Ebola. We modeled SARS. We in real time, we model and we make predictions. And I teach the kids how to do that. So I started doing that in high school. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and AIDS was a big problem there back in the early 80s. And that's when I was just starting college. And I discovered early in college that all those cool differential equations that I was learning actually work really well to describe epidemics. And so I started getting involved. And I quickly learned that what you hear in the media, as you mentioned about Mark Twain, there are liars, damn liars, and statistics is another quote from Mark Twain.
You have to keep it clean.
Yeah, exactly. But I quickly learned that what you hear in the media is seldom the facts. More often, the facts filtered through a spin filter that's designed to cause you to do some kind of behavior. So, for example, the simple example of with AIDS was that when I was in high school, I got a little handout. Back in those days, they gave us dittos. I don't know if you remember those, but they had the ditto handout, and the handout basically said AIDS was the fastest growing disease threat to youngsters in the world. And so make sure to wear your condoms if you're doing sexual activity. And I thought, wow, this is scary, right? I mean, these are our leaders telling us young people to be careful. So I looked into it a little bit because I'm an inquiring person. And I discovered that nobody in my community, indeed my entire state of California, in my age range, had died of AIDS. So where could they possibly get the statistic? And what they had done is they had averaged over the whole world. And sure enough, in Africa, in the teenagers, there were a lot of people dying from AIDS. So if you average us with them, sure, teenagers were at risk. But I realized that the statistics game they were playing with us wasn't designed to tell me what the real risks in life were. It was designed to try to manipulate me into a certain behavior. So even since I was a youngster, I've been learning that lesson.
That's very important. That's very important because that's really what we're talking about here. I'd mentioned that the government is not going to give up anything that they have.
I heard you say that. You're exactly right.
And they've gotten to where they've gotten to by using figures.
Yes.
Not facts, figures. Well, I'm sorry. We don't know how much of those figures are facts. That's why you're here today to straighten us out on
I'll
that.
help you sort through some of that. Sure enough.
Let me start with this.
Sure.
20,000, 200,000. I hear that the direct related deaths to COVID are 20,000 or less. United States, not the state of Ohio, but the United States. And then I hear 200,000, or is it 300,000 now? And by the way, when these figures seem to be convenient or coincidental, then's when you really need to question them. Like right before we're supposed to have a vaccination come up.
Exactly. I always tell people science and politics don't play well together. Anytime a scientific idea or a mathematical idea makes it into the public, it usually goes through the filter of some political interest. And so you can't just accept what you hear. You need to look behind the numbers if you want to know what's really going on. And so, for example, when just by a remarkable coincidence, this year was an election year. And so normally in election years, I work with my students, we make predictions. And, for example, in 2016, we did all the calculations and predicted that Trump was going to win way in advance. And we posted those on Facebook and everything. And people all thought we were insane, but we were right. So, but anyway, this year we would have normally done the election, but because I happened to have an exchange student from China in my class, and he said, hey, my parents live right next to this place in China called Wuhan, and there's this epidemic there. Can we study that together? Because my students knew that every year I pick either an epidemic or sunspots or the climate or something current that's interesting, it's in the media, that's real life, and I teach them how to download the data and analyze it and then learn how to get behind the news to understand what's really going on. So I said, well, sure, we won't do the election this year. Instead, we'll do the Wuhan epidemic. And so we began modeling that, if you can believe it, in December of last year. So I've been modeling COVID almost a year now. And then as it began to spread, we were armed for bear. And I began putting all that stuff up on the internet. But the media began bombarding us with these huge, scary numbers, which absolutely didn't agree with what our modeling was teaching us. Now, we were at a little bit of a disadvantage because the numbers coming out of China weren't right. I think that most people would agree that the China's suppressing a lot of that information, but at least we got enough information from that got us started. And then we began modeling all throughout Europe. We began modeling those countries. Before we knew it, by March and April, I was modeling 20, 30 countries and all of the states in the United States, and I was posting those on Facebook. And one of the things is since I'm a scientist, I do experiments. I set up controls on my experiment. My experiment was I'm not allowed to listen to any news, not allowed to read any news, not allowed to read any scientific studies even. I was only going to follow the data. I was going to go around the world and scrape the internet, and I'm a pretty good programmer, so I was writing software that would go around the world, different websites, state websites, federal websites, global websites, scraping data, bringing it in my computer, making predictions, following what was really going on so that I didn't have to sift through the spin that was being applied through the media. I could get the data straight from the sources. And I was coming up with numbers 100 times smaller than what you were hearing in the media. So people were interested in that. And before I knew it, I had a Facebook page with 52,000 members and about 40,000 followers. It was amazing. I had no idea that people would be that interested. But I'm a scientist, and one of the rules in science is you have to document your predictions. So every step along the way, there are time-stamped predictions showing what I'm thinking, why I'm thinking, what equations I'm using, how I'm organizing it. I'm documenting my progress, and people really appreciated that transparency and my honesty, and developed a huge following. Of course, as the election approached late summer, Facebook took my site down.
We've experienced a similar situation.
Yeah.
And just we didn't get any kind of a notice, any kind of a warning. It was like,
oh no,
5 days before the election, boom, you're gone.
Yeah.
I called them, didn't call them, but I tried to contact them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a Facebook account, it's kind of difficult to contact them. But that aside, I
Yeah.
did find out from them that, yes, it's been taken down. Everything's gone. It's not appealable. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
At least in my case, it was appealable. And what started happening about May and June is I would post something. And if I posted a topic that was what they considered against their community standards, like vaccinations, are off limits, man. You talk about vaccines on Facebook and they take you right down immediately. And then as the election got closer, if you talked about the election, they took you right down immediately. So, but what would happen is they would take my site down, I would appeal it, and then they would have a person look at the account and I'd be back up again because I wasn't violating the community standards. I wasn't breaking the rules. They just didn't like what they heard. And so that cycle, we were stuck in that cycle every other week or so, the site would be down. So we started other pages. Follow the Data with Dr. Frank is the name of the page. We started an account on MeWe, which is now up to about 11,000 members. And then we started another one on Parler, which is about 1,500, and we've since started a new Facebook page too, which I just checked this morning, is up to about 6,300. So in other words, people really, I don't do any advertising per se. I just put the truth out there.
You're hungry.
And people are hungry for the truth, and they trust me now. They've seen that when I make mistakes, I tell right up. I put it right on the page. Hey, here's the mistake I made. Here's why I made it. It's embarrassing. I don't like making mistakes. But this isn't a scientific publication. This is not a peer-reviewed scientific publication that I'm putting here. This is my stream of thought. This is me following the scientific method. And in the scientific method, there are certain procedures you follow, and people can follow that. And so it's fun. It's become educational. I'm a teacher too, right? So I'm teaching people how to do the scientific method. It's been really fun.
We're going to take a break here in a couple minutes.
Okay, sure.
We are on the phone with Dr. Douglas G. Frank, and he was raised in Northern California, but we can forgive him for that.
It's a good spot where I was.
Yeah, and he didn't get his mind right, I don't think, until he moved to Ohio in the mid '80s. That's probably your salvation, brother.
I like it here. It's very good values. It's a perfect place to raise a family because, California is a pretty shallow place. Now, the community I grew up in was a farming community. Mostly, I would say a third of the people there were Portuguese dairymen, and good old fashioned, work hard, successful business people.
Have you met our governor?
DeWine?
Our governor?
I've not met him in person. I have connections to him, and but I'm highly unimpressed.
I heard that. We're going to take a short break, Mr. Anderson. You can get that clip ready. When we come back, I'm still going to have to ask the answer: 20,000 or 200,000.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll talk about that. Sure.
We got a caller from area code 214. So hang in there with us, area code 214, and we'll get with you. And go ahead, Mr. Anderson. The floor is yours. BJ Edwards along.
We know a couple of things. One, we don't know. And that's the worst. We have a whole slew of, it's a combination of, on the Rumsfeld scale, of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Excuse me, that's the Rumsfeld epistemological scale. Let's be correct about this. We know the known unknowns that some number of cases, some number of deaths is being incorrectly attributed to COVID-19. We don't know what the actual number is. And now we have unknown, which is, well, that's the one that comes and bites you in the ass. And I think that's going to be the question you're going to ask Scott. So I'm going to lay off here and call it quits for the day.
Sorry about that. Making the unknown known. Our guest today is Dr. Douglas Frank. And he's going to give us some information that we need to have this morning. And nobody's perfect, but I think we're going to get a lot closer to the truth with our guest today than we are listening to your local news. I can't even listen. I cannot listen to the TV anymore or the news anymore unless I go to old movies, because it's 24/7. This is horrible. This is terrible. People are when I go out in public, I expect to see bodies lying in the street. I mean, if you hear the news,
Yes.
that's what you expect to see. We got a caller. I'm going to try to bring you on. Hang on a second. Area code 214. Your first name, please, and your question or comment.
Sounds like a little technical difficulty there, buddy.
Yeah, I don't know whether they're bashful and shy. Ending in 74. Can you hear me, caller?
Check your volume on the soundboard.
Okay.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I have to step in now and then, help him out.
Caller, can you hear us now? I'm not getting anything at all on the soundboard, Mr. Anderson. Don't know what the problem is. Phone. Well, I'm going to mute. There you are.
Oh, there it was.
I don't know if you can hear me. I've been able to hear you throughout the whole call, but can't hear Dr. Frank at all.
You can't hear Dr. Frank at all?
No, she wouldn't be able to on the phone line.
I can hear you and everything that you say, but I can't hear anything you're saying.
Yeah, on the phone line, you wouldn't be able to. I apologize for that.
Oh, okay.
That's one technical thing. We haven't been able to hook our guest into the phone line.
Connection would be?
Yeah. You can go to lastcallradio.live, and the links are there. I'll give you, if you want to call in. What is that number, Mr. Anderson?
302-202-1110.
That's the one she's on now.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
There's a straight call-in number, Mr. Anderson. There it is. It's, and I apologize. It's 605. You have a pen and paper handy? 605.
I'm getting one right now. That's
Okay.
South Dakota. Okay.
We work with anybody. 605 475 0010. 605 475 0010. And for some reason, if that doesn't work, 641 741 0816. And then if you want to call back and talk to our guest today, please do so. I apologize for the technical problems. Again, I've forgotten that the call-in line you cannot hear. You're put on a mute mode. So I apologize for that.
Okay. I'll call in on these. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. BJ Edwards along with Mr. Anderson. I had posed a question, 20,000 or 200,000. In your best estimate, today's date or last week, Friday, whatever, what do you say the numbers are, doctor?
The lower end.
20,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason is because it's like we talked about gravity at the beginning of the program. People, if someone is right on the edge of the cliff and then, the wind comes along and they fall off the edge of the cliff, what really killed them is a debate. And the problem is that COVID is one of those things. It's a pretty aggressive, think of it like an aggressive flu. If you're close to the edge already, then it can push you over. So the question is did COVID cause that, or did your already pre-existing condition, your comorbidity, they call it, is that what called it? And so there's this gray area in there. And if that's all it was, I bet you the numbers that were being reported would be much lower. But there's something else going on. There's a financial incentive for our hospitals and our doctors to label them as COVID because they get reimbursed much larger amounts for those cases. And we set this, it's a typical government problem. Every time government comes up with a solution, they create more problems that they have to have solutions for. Only it's a geometric growth thing. What we did is we told all of our hospitals back in March, that this massive wave of deaths was about to come upon us. And they put up all the other elective procedures and things and built all these COVID wards, got everything all ready, and it never materialized. And they laid off all these other nurses and everything. So we basically damaged our hospitals dramatically during that time. We set them up for a bunch of customers that never showed. So we financially strapped them. We
Whoa.
destroyed their infrastructure and whatnot. So then when patients start coming in, if I were to tell you, and you're a struggling business, if I were to say, oh, if you say that this person is 6 foot tall, we'll give you $100,000. But if you say they're 6'1", we'll give you $200,000. What are you going to do? You're going to label them as 6'2" and collect $200,000 instead of $100,000. So we've set up this cycle where the hospitals, it's in their financial incentive to find as many COVID cases as they can. And most hospitals use a faster test to evaluate patients as they're admitting them, to find out, how to sort them. As when a patient comes in, they don't want to put people who have COVID with people who don't. So they give you a quick test when you first come in, but that test is very unreliable. And it has a tendency to have several false positives. The fastest tests, I remember back in March and April, had as high as 30 to 40% false positives. And so what was happening is the hospitals were using those tests, identifying a lot of COVID people who tested positive, or perhaps they had COVID previously and it was being detected that they had it. So they would count as a COVID patient even though they weren't there for COVID. And so that you sort of set up this cycle where you've encouraged the diagnosis. It's in there. It's also in the political interests of some states to have as many COVID cases as they had. They get more federal money reimbursements. It's in the political interests of our political leaders to have a huge crisis, because when there's a crisis, they can, as you pointed out, the government never gives back. They can ratchet in more control, and the more control they have, then the more crisis there is, the more control they can have, and government never gives up control. They always try to acquire more control. The only exception I can think of that off the top of my head was 1776, when they said, hey, George Washington, will you be our king? And he said, no, we're going to have a constitution. We're going to have a democracy. And that's what's made our country, that constitution and that fundamental principle of keeping the power with the people, is what's produced the most successful, most prosperous, most generous, most amazing country in the history of the world. And we've allowed that to be eroded.
Amen, brother. Amen. What about, maybe you can speak to this and maybe you can't. One of our listeners wanted to know about ivermectin and how about hydrochloroquine and the medications that I used to work for a pharmaceutical firm.
Yeah.
And I understand, I'm a businessman, so I understand that your bottom line is profit. So what about the ivermectins of the world and the hydrochloroquines? What's happening?
Let me answer that question in a rhetorical way first, and then maybe directly after that.
Okay.
So you remember when in March and April, when COVID first started heating up, that the CDC told the public not to wear masks. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, why did they do that? They did that because studies had been taking place for over 20 years or so, scientific studies where you do controls, that showed that in general, it didn't give you a net advantage to use masks for the general public, because it might help in some situations, but in other situations, it makes it worse. So it's not a really statistical benefit. And remember, masks were in short supply and they needed them for our medical workers. So it was a perfectly reasonable thing for the CDC to say, hey, let's don't encourage everybody to use masks. We need those for our medical workers. And it's really not that much of a benefit from the scientific studies anyway. But then the politics got involved. Like I said earlier, politics and science don't play well together. As soon as the politics gets involved, it starts appropriating the science it wants. It cherry picks the science it wants for its own end. So then you had politicians and people with political power and business interests picking the specific principles and ideas that were the most advantageous to them. Suddenly it became, yep, masks were the right thing to wear. So that's an example where they didn't do a new controlled experiment to get the answer. It was driven by political interests. And so that's the problem whenever science and politics mix. And so this ivermectin and hydrochloroquine is the same problem. There are scientific questions. There are medical questions. And we need to do careful medical experiments to find out what the effective treatments or not effective treatments are. And once we know what those are, after careful experiments, then we can do it. The problem is that the politics has got involved. And once the politics involved, it messes up the science. And let me give you an example of that. So back in March and April, I have a dear friend who is a respiratory therapist. She's the one who sticks tubes down your throat when you're about to die from COVID or from the complications of COVID. And she works in those emergency rooms. And she says early on, she was up at Cleveland Clinic. And she says early on, they were using hydrochloroquine to help the patients. And she said they were not seeing any effect. And so they quit doing it because they base their practices in a triage situation. You do what works. You don't do what people say should work. You do what is working. And it wasn't working. Well, I think over time now we've learned that hydrochloroquine is not good as a Band-Aid later. It's good earlier on. But it took time for us to learn that, right? So it's the same way with Intervectin. All these things, they take a lot of time to do rigorous, careful studies to know what actually works and what doesn't. And the problem you run into then is, how did you even know about it? Did you read the scientific journal that did the scientific study on it? No. You listened to some media report about it. And as soon as you've done that, you've listened to it through the filter and the vested interest of the people reporting it to you. And it's one of the reasons why in my controls on my page, I don't listen to that stuff. I deliberately stay away from that. I will read a fundamental scientific study where they've done all the controls and the rigorous controls, and I have the technical ability to do that. I have 60 peer-reviewed publications of my own, so I'm very well familiar with the scientific publication and what goes into that. And I also know, since I'm scientifically trained, I know how to recognize a good experiment and a poor experiment, and I recognize how bias leaks in. And so I don't mind going back and reading the real scientific studies. But the fact is, real studies take time to do. So I would say I appreciate, one of the things I appreciate about Trump is that he removed a lot of the regulations that allowed a lot of these tests to be done in unsafe ways. It's an emergency. People are dying. And if somebody wants to take the risk and be the lab rat, as you mentioned earlier, I have no opposition to that. They should be able to be a lab rat. And we need lots of lab rats in an emergency to find out what some of these things work. Now, your genetics are different than my genetics. So what works for you might not work for me. And what works for me might not work for you. So health is a complicated thing with many factors. It's what we call in science a soft science, because it's not like in physics where I can drop a ball at a specific time and calculate how long it's going to take to hit to the ground and then make a prediction and have it come out to be right. I can control all the variables. With people, there's so many variables. You mentioned you played that little clip during the break with the epistemological exercise, and he's right. I have ways, though, since I'm a data analyst. I'm good at analyzing data. It's one of my hobbies is to learn to take huge data sets, lots of data, and tease out of it truths. And a simple example of that would be if I said to you, what is x plus, if I give you a simple math equation where I say x plus y equals 10. And then I say, tell me, what is y? And you would say, well, I don't know. It could be anything. If x was 1, then y would be 9. If x was 2, then y would be 8. So if I say, well, x plus y is 10, tell me what y is. And you're like, well, I don't know. If you can learn to control one of the two variables, then you can find out what the other variable is. And that is the analytical technique that I use to figure out how many flu deaths are actually being called COVID deaths. And believe me, it's a lot.
I'm going to try to bring this gentleman on if I can. So hang
Sure.
on. Can you hear us, Roger?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear Roger?
Loud and clear. Hi, Roger. Good morning.
Do you have a question or a comment, Roger?
Oh, general comment. I'm assuming you're talking about the Supreme Court a little bit.
Not this morning, not yet.
Hello?
Roger won't be able to hear our guests. So
He says not yet this morning. We haven't talked about that, Roger.
Okay. Well, I'll call back when you hit there then. So.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Go ahead and disconnect. I do have a question for you. We're going to take a break here quickly. Maybe
fire away.
After the break. I don't sense that you're money motivated or power motivated. That isn't what you're about.
No, I don't get paid for anything I do. Although I will confess that because of my public, people have seen me in public, that multiple people have hired me to do projects for them. So, there's something about honesty that draws people. And since I really do my best to always tell the truth, and I taught my boys, never lie, just never lie. It's one of the big 10. If you feel a lie forming in your mouth, just don't move your lips. Don't lie, never lie. And I think people recognize that about me. And so they're drawn to that. So people have hired me. So there's nobody's paying me to do what I do. The reason I started the experiment in the first place is because I wanted to know, am I safe? Is my family safe? Or is my community safe? What is real here? Because what we're hearing in the media is not real. I knew it wasn't real right from the beginning because I'd already been modeling COVID for months and I already knew it wasn't real. So then the question was, well, I want to know for myself. So I'm a scientist. What do? I do an experiment. And that's where that's gone. So no, there's no financial interest for me. I guess, since I started a YouTube page, I have got something like 3,500 subscribers or something like that. And they monetized that page a while back. And I think maybe I made $60 in about 6 months. So,
wow.
I guess to say that I've received no money, would be sort of, would be not the truth. But, obviously that isn't the purpose of the page. The purpose is to disseminate the truth and to stand for the truth. And then when it's like, I know you're a Christian, the light on a hill cannot be hid. So if you hold up the light, you hold up the truth, then people will be drawn to that. And that gives me a chance to help share the truth. A story about that, I was early on, maybe March or April, I was kind of, I was up late, 2 or 3 in the morning. I was feeling a little down, because I was modeling all these countries, watching all these tens of thousands of people die. It gets kind of weighs on you after a while. And, it's not just numbers to me. I know that these are real people that are really dying and it's not a pleasant death. And I was feeling a little down. And so I got my Bible out and I was reading, and I just happened to come across Psalm 23. And it's kind of seems trite, but I read the Bible quite aggressively. I just happened to come across it and it felt good. So I clipped and pasted it on my page. And this is like 3 in the morning in America, Eastern time. And within 5 minutes or so, 50 people on my page clicked that they liked it and commented. And they were saying, wow, that was just what I needed to hear right then, Dr. Frank. Thanks for posting that. And it began to dawn on me that this whole epidemic thing is also a spiritual war, not just a political one, not just a medical one. People's spirits are hungry for something solid and peace in their hearts and healing. And so that also drew a lot of people. So from then on, I started posting scripture regularly. And I can't tell you how often people really appreciated that. I'll put a little discussion of scripture on Sunday mornings. I like to do that weekly. That way I don't push too many people away who don't really want to see that. But people who know I'm going to do that, they show up on Sunday mornings and they read my scripture and my thoughts on the passage of the day. And, maybe 20%, 30% of the people show up regularly for that. It's pretty cool. But what reason I bring that up, though, is because people don't just want facts. They don't just want the truth. That's true. They come for that. They also want to have peace in their hearts. And of course, we know where the peace that passes all understanding comes from. So I like sharing that with them.
Costco.
And, what's that?
Costco. That's where you get it. But I used to have it, but I have to buy a mask now. We have to wear a mask. We got to take a quick break.
Okay, sure.
With you. I'm sorry about that, Mr.
Yeah,
Anderson,
no problem.
If you'd go ahead, I think there's a clip or two that we could play that's appropriate.
Sure.
We're on the phone with Dr. Frank, who's
Happy to
being
be here.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with BJ Edwards.
Facts and figures, getting to the bottom of all this. This is, and anything that the doctor presents today will and probably can be refuted based upon what you're doing, what you're using as a source, which brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you today is,
Sure.
And we're probably going to, as you predicted, we're probably going to go into the second hour with you. You don't mind doing that, do you?
Not a bit. I'm enjoying our conversation.
What source are you using? I mentioned earlier that the CDC, as far as I'm concerned, is not a good source, but that seems about all we're left with. Or the government. It's like the fox guarding the hen house here. Where do we get objective facts?
That's a great question. And early on in the epidemic, I was going to every state webpage and downloading their data. And then I would go to other sources like USA Facts or Worldometers or Wikipedia or CDC or Johns Hopkins. And I'm a pretty good programmer. So I wrote software that would automatically pull all these data down. And then before I would post on my page, I would reconcile those data. And I got to tell you, they all disagree with each other. So especially at the beginning, that was the case. And it showed that, okay, so what's the most reliable? And so I would learn over time what the most reliable is. Now, let me give you a kind of a counterexample to that. One of the states, South Carolina, the governor said, we're not going to tell anybody anything. They basically made their web page completely opaque. So you had to deduce what was happening in their state based upon other reported data. So that gives you an extreme. Then there were other states like the state of Ohio and the state of Florida that give you intimate detail about just about every case. So there was a large range of kind of reporting there. The John Hopkins page and the COVID monitoring project and those things, they all didn't agree with one another. So it's hard to answer the question like, where do you get your data, Dr. Frank? The answer is, I get it from everywhere. Now, what's happened is things have kind of stabilized now, and there are a few sources that are more consistent, let's say, than others. The nice thing about the CDC is they don't just tell you numbers, they also tell you the designations. So for example, earlier you said there are 20,000 or so deaths at the CDC that are only COVID. What that means is that if you look at their death certificate, the doctor can fill in multiple causes, and there's like an immediate cause of death. And it's sort of like the guy we pushed off the cliff. Remember, you brought that up, that example. The immediate cause of death was not gravity. The immediate cause of death wasn't that he fell off a cliff. The immediate cause of death was that his head got smashed. Okay. So like there's an immediate cause of death, then there's things that lead up to that cause of death. And so a doctor has the ability to put in that. It turns out that something like 5%, only about 5% of the deaths that the CDC have reported to them are only COVID. All the others have other designations on it. So at least one nice thing about the CDC data is they give you all the codings that they apply to each death. And so you can tease out some of the more interesting information.
So you're saying COVID does exist?
Of course.
Okay.
The question is, it's one of those things, for example, where you'll hear scientific arguments. Well, they've never isolated the DNA for it. And I don't disagree with that. The reason I know it exists is because I can show you graphs where the deaths are higher than usual, substantially higher than usual. So something exists. Let's call it COVID. And scientists are good at that. When we see something, we give it a name, and then that way we think we understand it. I play that game with my students at school. Especially my younger students, they come to class and I'll say, okay, everybody, what's gravity? And then they'll say, oh, doctor, well, that's a force. Well, wait a minute. No, a force is what the effect that you measure from gravity. What is gravity? And then kids start to answer that, and they begin to realize we don't have a clue what gravity is. There are theories about what we think gravity might be, but all we really know is how gravity behaves. And then we write equations and models that help us to predict what will happen. It's the same thing with everything in science, and COVID is no different. We don't particularly know exactly what causes COVID or what it is yet. We may find and isolate the virus at some point, but we give it a name, and it makes us feel like we understand it. So when you say, does COVID exist? That's what I would say. COVID symptoms exist. Yes. How about that for it sounds wishy-washy, but I'm being technically correct and scientifically correct because I'm a scientist.
There's something there. Is that what you're saying?
There's something there, and where there's smoke, there's fire. So there's smoke for sure.
Oh, please don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do the smoke fire thing, because that's all we heard about Russia. Where
Oh,
there's
gotcha.
every day.
Oh,
something's
gotcha.
going
Yes,
on.
yes.
No, I'm being ornery.
No, that's okay. Our president was not a Russian operative, by the way. That's hokum. I grew
Well,
up on a farm, and I know the smell when I smell it.
well, there's where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
All right.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry about that one.
A lot more questions to ask you. Real
Sure.
quickly, testing, and I can't remember the test, but if you go above 35 or 40, it becomes ineffective. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're talking about the PCR test.
Yes.
So what happens is, like, let's say you want to know if somebody is infected with COVID, then you need to find if there are certain molecules in their body. And the virus, when you have the virus, you shed certain molecules as a natural product of the viral actions. And so they'll swab out of your nose, they'll stick that thing up your nose and they'll swab around. And if they get a few molecules when they do that, they're doing good. So they take that and then they wipe it on a I'll just give you an example. This is sort of hypothetical, but it gives you the idea. They wipe it on a petri dish and grow it. That isn't what they really do, but it's the idea. And then you grow it a little bit, and then after you grow it a little bit, you take some of that out and you put it in another petri dish and grow it again, and then put it in another petri dish and grow it again. And that every time you grow it again, that's called a cycle. And the thing is there, since you're only looking for a couple of molecules, it takes a lot of cycles to get enough molecules that you can detect. Now, the guy who invented the PCR test that we're using said that you need to do about 30 cycles. Any more than that, he says the problem is that you're going to be amplifying other things that everybody already has anyway. Let me give you an example of that. This is my favorite example of this. So let's say we were to take 100 men at random off the street, and then go to the grocery store and buy 100 of those pregnancy tests. And then what we would do is we would have these 100 men pee on that stick 100 times. It's the little pregnancy test that you pee on and little red line. Okay, you do that 100 times. Most people are surprised to learn that when you do that, you get 1 or 2 positives. Now, and I know that God didn't make us that way, that men don't get pregnant. So how could we get 1 or 2 positives pregnancy tests for all those 100 men? And the answer is that the pregnancy test is not testing if you're pregnant or not. It's looking for certain hormones. Some men naturally have more of that hormone in their body. It's just their physiology. Some men, for example, might have a certain type of testicular cancer that produces these extra hormones. And so you'd be actually detecting the presence of those hormones. So it's not really a pregnancy test. It's detecting the presence of those hormones. So if I were to say to you, let's find out how many men are pregnant in our culture and run out and do tens of thousands of pregnancy tests, you would laugh at me. You would say, Doug, you're wasting your time. We already know that's a bad idea. Well, it's sort of the same thing with the PCR tests. The PCR tests are not designed to test people at random for if they've got COVID or not. It's designed to test people who already have symptoms. So you're a doctor, and somebody comes into your office and they got sniffles and a fever and they feel miserable. And you look at them and you say, yeah, that person is sick. Let's see if it's COVID. You take a swab out of their nose, you run the test. A few days later, you do 30 cycles, 30 amplification cycles, and it's through the roof. Okay, yeah, this guy has COVID. Okay, bingo. So that's what that test is designed for. Now, if you just take a bunch of random people and then wipe their noses and then do 40 cycles, not just
1
30.
minute before a hard break.
Okay. And yeah, thanks. Good. And do 40 cycles instead of 30, you're going to detect all kinds of other things that the test really wasn't designed to detect. And it'll give you a positive, even though that person didn't really have COVID. So that's what's going on with the testing situation, with PCR testing. And different labs use different number of cycles and et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm coming up to a hard break. So if you want, I'll stop it there.
Okay. Mr. Anderson, we're about ready to go to break. When we come back, more of Dr. Frank making the unknown known. And is America sick? Oh, I don't even want to.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with BJ Edwards.
And we are back. We're on the phone with Dr. Douglas G. Franks. He is living in Ohio, born and raised in Northern California. Like I said before, we're not going to hold that against him. I believe you got a BA in chemistry from Westmont College, Santa Barbara, California.
Yes.
And then you went to graduate school, University of California, and you completed your doctor requirements before you got your mind right. You came to the University of Cincinnati here in Ohio, and you're part of the Ohio Eminent Scholar Program. So
yeah, it was really nice. I hadn't quite finished my PhD, and the governor of Ohio, Governor Celeste at the time, back in the 80s, paid, he did what they called the Ohio Eminent Scholar Program, which the objective was to find the top scholars in the world and bring them to the universities to beef up the universities to kind of create centers of science and industry. And I was part of that. It was quite an honor to be one of the people chosen for that. And it was like, for a scientist, it was heaven, because they gave us $5 million to set up a world-class laboratory. And it didn't take long for me. Well, I shouldn't say that. It took 4 years, let's say, or 3 years, having those kinds of resources to make a major scientific breakthrough, which was pretty fun.
We have, I get on the neighborhood news. I love to talk to people about things, about COVID. And I'm every time I bring something up that's counter panic, I'll have somebody come on and say, well, my uncle or a good friend of mine died of COVID. And I didn't, at one point, I didn't know anybody that had been even close to being exposed to COVID.
Right.
Now I'm starting to run across all kinds of people that have been diagnosed as having COVID. What's that all about?
That goes back to what I mentioned in the previous segment about the way that we're doing testing. You know, if I, like in Ohio, we're doing something like 70,000 tests a day of random people. These are not people that are coming to the office, the doctor's office, saying, I'm sick, give me a test. These are just people we're testing at random that call them asymptomatic people. If I were to test, now I just gave you the numbers a minute ago, right? Out of every 100 men we test with a pregnancy test, we're going to get 1 or 2 positives. And we know, and you know, and I know they're not pregnant. Let's just pretend that's 1 in 100. Well, if you do 70,000, what's 1% of 70,000? That's how many you're going to get, 700 a day positives. Okay, and those aren't real positives. Those, and that's with the pregnancy test of only 1%. So your neighbor comes up to you and say, yeah, my neighbor John Smith is pregnant. You're going to look at that and go, what? You would know better when you hear that, but you don't know better when you hear the numbers about the COVID tests, because it's not obvious whether a person actually had COVID or not. What makes matters worse is the example I gave you with the pregnancy test. It's only a 1% to 2% false positive. The COVID test, just starting October 1, Ohio had delivered to our state 3.5 million of the new antigen tests, which have a false positive rate above 10%. So, in other words, if you're doing 70,000 tests a day with a test that gives 10% false positives, not just 1%, you're going to get 7,000 cases a day. And guess what Ohio is reporting? So I'm not a bit surprised that you have neighbors and friends that are saying, oh yeah, I got the test and I tested positive. I'm not a bit surprised when you're doing that much testing. Now, not all the tests would they give you a positive or false. Certainly some people really do have COVID, and so they're going to test positive. And if you had it in the past, that will test positive. But the state reports them all as live cases. And that's deliberate. That's intended to scare you so that you'll comply with their federal health orders. It's a deliberate strategy that epidemiologists and politicians use to try to scare the public into compliance. You can see it, especially in the state of Ohio. They'll report huge numbers of deaths in a single day. And it sounds horrible. And the media picks it up and they announce it on the radio. But then you go to the state website, you download their .csv file, and you notice that the deaths that they announced today, didn't happen today. In fact, they happened over the last 6 months. And you can look up on each one of those deaths what day it happens, and you can put them on a graph. And I've done that multiple times on my Follow the Data with Dr. Frank page, where I've shown you that what they tell you today is not what happened today. It's what happened over multiple months. So like right before Thanksgiving, Ohio did a big dump of data. It was something like 280 deaths they announced in a single day. And boy, did that make the news. But when you actually assign it to the previous months and whatnot, it worked out to be something more like 30 deaths actually happened on that day. And a lot of those deaths were questionably whether they were COVID or not. They could have easily been somebody who died of a motorcycle accident but happened to test positive for COVID. So a lot of the hospital admissions, for example, are not from COVID, but with COVID. If you test positive and you're going into the hospital, you count as a COVID case, period. But you and I just explained to you that the test that they're now using is about a 10% false positive. And that's not new. The hospital's been doing that for some time.
And it pays more money, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
For the hospital to have you as a patient.
Oh, a lot more. Yeah.
By the way, Eric says, thank you, Dr. Frank, for all your hard work. I know how tedious data science can be. So we've got
tedious unless you love it.
Yes.
And I love it. I was my son early on in the epidemic. My son walked into my room and saw me there furiously coding and writing graphs and whatnot. And my son looked at me and he said, "Dad, you were born for this." And he's a college student now at University of North Carolina, so he knows me pretty well by now. And he says, "Dad, you were born for this exact event."
University of North Carolina, isn't that where the virus started?
Yeah, it's one of the places. Yeah, and we drove him out to, this is his second year there, and we drove him out to school. Within 2 weeks, we had to bring him home again because they shut down. They shut down life.
What this is doing to families is, it's more than sinful. It is just what this has done to families. I was talking to a friend the other day. Yeah. They have family in Cincinnati, and we're in Columbus, and they're going to have to go down to Cincinnati 2 or 3 times to visit 2 or 3 family members, where before they would all get together. And it's just shameful what we're doing to everything. The separation this is doing to families alone is, like I said, more than sinful.
Well, and then I'm a data guy, right? Mm-hmm. That isn't just an emotional burden or an inconvenience. There are actually consequences that you can quantify because of the mitigation procedures we put in place. You mentioned visiting your family. So, for example, one of the first things they did is they locked up all of our old people in their rest homes and isolated them from their families. Now, just by coincidence, 2 years ago, my wife's mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. And so we moved her out here to Cincinnati to care for her. And we cared for her all the way up to her end. And so I got to see the whole progress of what Alzheimer's dementia does to a person. And it's a horrible thing. I don't wish it on anybody. But I'm quite familiar with the disease now. And one of the things we learned is that there's a period of time every day where she needed us to, she would become cogent and she would say, "Doug, why am I here? Why am I not at home?" And we would have to tell her, "Okay, we brought you to Cincinnati because you have Alzheimer's dementia." And she'd say, "Well, what's wrong with me? Am I going to get better?" And, we'd have to kind of go through this whole litany every day. Mm-hmm. And after about half an hour or so, she'd become calm. And then we'd have like a good hour and a half with her. And I have a special needs daughter, Nellie. She has Down syndrome. She's 23. And Nellie would hang out with her all afternoon and give her hugs and cuddles and bring her drinks, help her go to the potty when she had to. In other words, it was a family thing, and grandma would thrive. Now, what we noticed is, like, if we had to be gone during about 11 o'clock is when she would start becoming cogent. If we were away from her during that time, it would only take a matter of 30 minutes to an hour, and she would be absolutely agitated, screaming, yelling, paranoid. She would be horrible. And then sometimes she would have little mini strokes. After that, we would feel horrible oh my gosh, we can't do that to grandma. We have to stay with her. We'd have to take her to the hospital because she had these TIA, little mini strokes. In other words, keeping her calm, keeping her cared for, she could live for a while. Well, because we are not doing that with our elderly people, the ones that we have imprisoned in their rest homes, isolated from the ones who love them, the ones who can give them that kind of gentle, tender care that they need to live, we've had 30,000 more Alzheimer's deaths this year than we usually do at this point. And in other words, that is a measurable, quantifiable consequence of the way we are punishing our elderly people because of COVID. That's just one consequence. And I just done the calculations as recently as yesterday. In America so far, we're almost 100,000 what we call excess deaths, more deaths than we normally have that are not due to COVID, but because of the way we are trying to mitigate the effects of COVID. Suicide is through the roof. I've been talking to superintendent of schools around the state of Ohio because they call me to get help on coaching on the data. I haven't spoken to one yet that hasn't said something very similar to this. In the first quarter, they've had more students hospitalized for attempted suicides in Ohio, high school students, attempted suicides, than they usually get in an entire year. So in other words, the rate of suicide that our younger children are trying are 4 times higher than usual. I was talking to a coroner department the other day. They said the number of overdoses has doubled or tripled from drug abuse. So in other words, there are the 90,000 to 100,000 extra deaths that we're having now that we don't usually have. That's because of the way we're behaving around COVID. I think it's immoral. It's sinful to torture our elderly people to death. It's sinful, immoral to deny our children their educations, to deny them their emotional health. Think about it. The kids that grow up through this and are traumatized by this, they're going to be neurotic for years. We're going to have consequences that we're going to have to deal with because of this. We're damaging our children. And by the way, they're the ones at the least risk. I just did the calculation yesterday. In the last 8 weeks in the United States, from 0 to 14 years of age, 8 children, maybe it was 10, it's something small like that. In the entire country, let's call it 10 children 0 to age 14 have died. In the entire country, our kids are not at risk, yet we are punishing them by damaging their childhoods, by the way we're treating them. So that would be my answer to that.
Humans need contact.
Yes.
It's an internal app that we're born with.
Oh yeah.
And you can't, when you deny them that, they put prisoners in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
That's
a great point. Yeah.
That would scare me to death to put me in solitary confinement where and like the central thing, no light.
Yeah.
That's harmful. No sounds, that's harmful. And there's a reason for that. And we need to recognize that what we're doing, this is all just absolutely positively insane. Yet this is like right out of 1984, George Orwell.
Yes.
You have neighbors who will report you if you don't do the right thing. And let me give a suggestion to folks out there. I can't mention the name of the store because of those aforementioned people, but I went into a retailer and bought some product, and I couldn't. I had 2 places to go to. One I couldn't go to because they were now requiring a mask, and I won't wear a mask. So I had to go to the other place. When I walked in, I said, I'm exempt. Fine, go ahead. I went in there to spend $9, and I ended up spending $90 because I couldn't get the other goods in the other store. Now, I didn't leave without going up to an assistant manager and said, I want to let you know something, and I want to recommend you do this. I went up to that assistant manager and I said, I want to let you know something. I come in here with the intention of spending $9, but I almost spent $100. And I did that because I couldn't go over to Costco because they're requiring masks now. So thank you very much for not harassing me.
Yeah.
And allowing me to feel like a human being in your store. And then I walked out. We need to do more of that because because I'm in there, they're going to get a call or two. Hey, I saw somebody in there and they didn't have a mask on. Oh, please do something about it. This is insane.
We've lost our minds.
Testing. 70,000 daily in Ohio. Can one person test and be reported as more than one figure? In other words, can I get tested more than once over a week's period of time? And will they count that as separate cases?
That's a great question. And early on in the epidemic, back in March and April, people were being double and triple counted. That was happening. And in fact, myself and a couple other people that are data geeks, we complained about that, and we pushed back up through channels, and the state had to quit doing it.
Good.
So they no longer do that. For the most part, there's still some that leak through, but it's a long, tedious process. So, for example, I mentioned to you a minute ago about death certificates. Let's say the governor gets up today and say 100 people died. We have 100 reported deaths today. Well, they didn't die today. You have to go back and read the death certificates to find out when they died. Well, they do the same thing with cases. They'll say, we have 5,000 new cases today. But when you go back, the county has to do a reconciliation where they go back. It's not the state, it's the county has to go back to the state and say, by the way, that's a double count, that's a double count, that's a double count. And what ends up happening is they report 5,000, but when you actually go back and do the numbers, it's like a third of that. So it's designed to shock you, to make it into the media, to scare you into compliance, but the numbers are actually way lower than what they're telling you they are.
I get that. I have a question for you, but we're going to have to take a break.
Okay.
So I'll give you a little time to think about it. Mike DeWine calls you up. He listens to the program. Of course he does. He listens to the program.
He should.
And he says, hey, I just heard you on last call. I need you to become the health director for the state of Ohio. I'm going to take a break. I want you to answer that question. What would you do if you became the health director for the state of Ohio? BJ Edwards along.
Last call with BJ Edwards. Real talk about real life.
And we are back, and we have with us today Dr. Douglas G. Frank, who has just been appointed the new health director for the state of Ohio. I'm kidding. But I
would love to do it. I would love to do that job, and I would do it very differently.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean do it differently?
So let me give a simple example first, and then I'll apply it. So let's say you have children, and they run out into the street. So you rush out there, you scream and yell at them, you take them out of the street, and you say, don't do that, don't do that. A car could come by and make you flat. And every parent's been in that situation before, I bet. Mm-hmm. Okay, then the next day, your kid runs out into the street and you run out there and you say, little Johnny, little Mary, don't do this. A truck could come by and boy, look at that big truck. You're going to be a grease spot on the road. And sometimes they comply, sometimes they don't. Now, there's sort of a parenting technique here. You keep increasing the fear, maybe you build a fence, you do things. One strategy could be that you bring them into their room and you show them videos of children getting run over by trucks all day. Okay. Now maybe your kids will never play in the street again, but you've traumatized them to the point that now they're going to be neurotic for the rest of their life. So I think that would be the wrong approach, to scare them so much to try to get them to comply. You believe as a parent that you're protecting them. You're doing something for their own good, because you know that it's maybe 1 out of 1,000 days that they play in the street, they might get run over by a truck and they might get killed. So you're trying to protect them from that risk. You're their parent, you love them, you're trying to protect them. So you over scare them to try to keep them to obey your rules. Well, that's the methodology that our state has chosen. They over-report numbers. They report them in multiple ways, blown out of proportion. It fills the airways, fills the news, fills the media, every way they can to try to scare you into complying. That is not how I would do it, because I think that breeds mistrust too. Because when they deliberately mislead you, when they deliberately lie with statistics, they make us not trust them anymore. So today, if I'm health director of the state, the very first thing I'm going to do is open the books. Everything is public. Everything they do. And I would get up every day and I would say, okay, guys, here's where the situation doesn't look good. Here's where it looks good. Here's why I think it looks bad in this community. Here's the procedure I would recommend that you do. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to show you this is what's actually going on. And I'd be really transparent about it. And instead of saying, danger, 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 you're all going to die, so you better listen to what I say. Instead of taking that approach, I'd be saying, we can do this together. I would use a positive approach. I would put a positive spin on it. I would every day, I would say, okay, it's really sad because in Smith community over here, we lost 10 people in our rest homes, and it's sad, and we regret that. And we made this mistake, and we're not going to make that mistake again. And this is how we're going to prevent it happening from that. In other words, I'd be transparent and group and want to work together as a team rather than trying to scare everybody into obeying me. I saw some statistics the other day that it's over 90%, something like 95% of the people in Ohio are wearing masks and social distancing. So all this fear is working. The governor is highly successful at scaring everybody into complying. But there are consequences of that. Like we have kids killing themselves. Truth of consequences. Kids are killing themselves because of the fear. And what's ironic about that is that the kids are safe. So they're not. And so you're actually killing children to try to save other people that are vulnerable. And that's the same decision you make with vaccines too, by the way. That's exactly the same decision. You put some people at risk from the vaccine who aren't at risk otherwise to try to, and then they claim, well, we're doing that because we want to get herd immunity because we want to protect grandma. Oh, so in other words, you're going to put people at risk deliberately and kill many of them because the statistics are known. You're going to kill them to try to potentially protect somebody else. I don't think that's okay.
This borders, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't border on child abuse. This is child abuse.
Absolutely it is.
Wear a mask and social distancing.
Yes, it is.
And it's like they're growing up in prisons. They are growing up in prisons.
Well stated.
And
at my school, our kids are in person, and where I teach at the Schilling School. And I can't tell you, I look forward to being with those kids every day. And by the way, there's a national website. Brown University it includes something like 9 million students across the country, and tens of thousands of faculty and staff at schools. And they've been tabulating what's going on in schools. So this isn't me just saying, well, this is my opinion that schools are safe. No, there's mountains of data. And we already knew these data back in March and April because over in Europe, they were doing the contact tracing. And the vector for spreading of COVID is not through the children. What happens is you and I go to work, you and I go to the grocery store, the convenience store, or whatever, especially the 25 to 40-year-old people. They're the ones who are spreading it the most because they're the ones interacting the most. And then they go home and they give it to their children. It's not the other way around. So schools are safe. And there's a couple of families at our school this year, for example, that pulled their kids, that decided not to send their kids to school. And the reason is because their children are sensitive. And they know that if they send their kid to school every day in a mask, that it's going to scare them. So they're pulling them from school and keeping their kids at home. And it's not a healthy thing to do to children, since they're not at risk anyway. Or maybe a more technically correct way to say that is they're at such minimal risk. It's like, are you going to let your child play in a beautiful big grassy field? And you would say, well, of course. Are they perfectly safe? Well, no, I guess lightning could strike them. Okay. But they're basically safe to play out in that field. So let them go play, and life is full of risks. But school is like, our school communities are some of the safest in the whole country. If you want to keep your kids safe, put them in school, away from the parents, which is their most likely place of getting the most likely place of them catching COVID. And the faculty who are saying, oh, well, you're putting us at risk by forcing us to go to school. Actually, I'm a faculty person. My safest place to be is there with the safest population in the country. So if you're trying to be rational and logical, that's where I need to be. And I do my best to make my classroom a fun, exciting place where the kids look forward to coming together and they get to escape all the insanity of the adults and our government in this country.
If you do go to work for the state of Ohio and you walk in there and you want to be honest and objective, I'm going to get you a bulletproof vest for Christmas because you're going to need it.
Yes, I agree. I'm in a few lawsuits. I'm an expert witness on a few lawsuits, and I sign affidavits and I we ask for discovery, we ask for certain kinds of information, and the state is desperately trying to not release certain kinds of information, because once that information comes out, everyone will see exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they know they'll be held to pay.
I have a friend who is a new friend who is part of this lawsuit with the state of Ohio, and they're basically suing the state of Ohio, saying that the COVID.
Is that Ohio Stands Up?
Yes.
I'm the expert. I'm their expert witness.
Okay. Well, they're tied into that lady that we're gonna talk about and probably connect you up with.
Mary Popper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pam. And it's but
Pam Popper.
There are fears when you go against a state like this.
Yeah.
There are issues that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, they'll come after me potentially.
Yeah. And
so pray for me, please.
Well, yeah, I pray for her. I pray for your protection, because you are out there and you're exposing yourself. And again, I asked a question early on. I mean, you have to be crazy to get involved in something like. You have to be crazy to involve in something that's insane. So I guess it fits together, doesn't it? Plus one, crazy and insane.
Yeah, I guess since I was raised a Christian, and I've when I made my scientific discovery, for example, and it made the cover of Science magazine, and I was interviewed all over the world and whatnot. It was kind of fun to be really popular for a while, but then I got put in the crosshairs for the old vested interest began coming after me. And I learned through that process, it took about 2 years to get through that process, that you stand with the truth, and then in the end you come out ahead if you stay with the truth from the beginning. That's the best way. And in the scripture I've been reviewing with the people on my page, we're in Luke. We're right at the place where Jesus sends out the 70, remember? And he sends them out to give testimony to the gospel. And when he does that, some of them are not treated well. And standing for the truth cost all the disciples their lives except one, right? John is the only one that wasn't martyred. So standing for the truth sometimes comes at a cost. But obviously Jesus thought it was worth the cost. He stood for the truth, and you saw what that got him. So if it happens, okay, it happens. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to stand for the truth.
Yep. And by the way, they're suing the state of Ohio because they say the state of Ohio is lying about this being a pandemic and about being, an emergency here in the state of Ohio. And what they're asking for, and this is a thing of beauty, what you just talked about, they're asking for the figures.
Oh, yeah.
Discovery. We want to see the figures.
I wrote that.
Did you? Okay.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. They're also they're also suing because this is the thing that's wrong with our situation right now. Ohio has a constitution. Ohio has rules. When emergencies happen, there's a procedure that we're supposed to go through, and it's all laid out. And what we're supposed to do, we aren't doing. And the governor has violated our own procedures. And so you would think, well, bad governor. But it's worse than that, because then our legislature that's supposed to call him on that's supposed to force him to go back in. That's balance, right? Balance of power. Our legislature is supposed to come in there and say, boom, you're not following the procedures. We're going to veto your actions. By the way, Bill 311 is up for vote this week, where the governor has vetoed a bill that this legislature put together that says we're not going to allow you to make any more emergency orders on anybody who doesn't have COVID. It can only be for people who have COVID or affected directly by COVID. And so he vetoed that bill last week, and this week is the override, and they have the votes to override.
Well, I pray they do.
If they don't, they're a bunch of spineless eunuchs.
That's what scares me.
And that's the problem. But I've talked to a few of those guys, and what they're saying is, yeah, the governor has vetoed it and he knows we can override it, but now we've brought him to the table. We've got these other 3 bills we want to get through, and we might be willing to not do the veto override if he'll give us these 3 bills. So in other words, that's politics in action right there. That's why I'm not a politician. I don't think that way. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, you don't want to watch too carefully when people are making sausage, because what they put in the sausage you don't want to look at. It's the same way when you're making laws. You don't want to be watching what's going on in the background. It's not pretty. And so that's kind of what's going on.
We're gonna take a quick break.
Sure.
I'm gonna give you another 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, there's just a couple things I want to discuss.
Sure.
First of all, what are super moms? And what do you mean by whack-a-mole? BJ Edwards along, Mr. Anderson, your last call. When we come back, we're going to find out what super moms are with Dr. Douglas G. Frank.
All right, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, and why we're here talking to you today?
Are you joking? For those of you who don't know me, I'm the flu. I am the reigning virus champion of the world internationally for the last 100 or so years. 2019, 2018.
So do you find that there's a competition between you and COVID?
COVID is the Cardi B to my Nicki Minaj. 2017. 2016. The Lady Gaga to my Madonna. It's kind of weird that the press stopped covering me at all. I'm just gonna use Uber Eats to give everybody the flu this year. Jeez. No one ever wore a mask for me except for in Japan. They were on to me.
Can you tell me the differences between you and COVID?
Can anyone really? Fever, that's me. Cough, I do that. Sore throat, also me. Guess how many people I got sick last year in America?
I mean, you're going to tell me anyway,
I'm gonna tell you, 56 million people. Runny or stuffy nose, that's a me thing. I do miss you guys in the summer. Muscle or body aches. Flu. Maybe we just have more people with COVID because you're testing more people. If you tested for the flu, we'd have a lot more flu cases. 2020 should have been another year for me, but no. COVID. Fatigue and tiredness. Also me. If all of your symptoms are me, it's probably me. What?
Do you find this more of like a sore loser situation?
I'm gonna give you me. Just, you're gonna shit your brains out. I just think maybe people should wonder where I went. They're not even keeping track of my stats this year. Those are my stats. I get people sick and they're like, it's a COVID death. I kill somebody, COVID death. Everything is not COVID. Does this seem fair to you? I'm doing the same thing I do every freaking year.
I guess it's not that fair.
Thank you. What kind of virus democracy is this if we can't even count on the vote being legitimate? I'm just saying, I heard COVID-19 is using enhancement drugs from China. If I had Chinese laboratories working on me, I'd be stronger too. It's kind of cheating. It's cheating. You can't even compete for these awards.
Have you had any thoughts about how you're going to get rid of COVID?
I have invested in Pfizer. Gotta play dirty sometimes.
I have another question.
Oh, good.
Are you upset that COVID has shut down the whole world?
Nope.
That was hilarious.
I love it. I love it.
I hadn't seen that before. That's fun.
When we last spoke, I asked you, who are super moms? What do you mean by whack-a-mole? And we haven't even talked about Sweden yet. We've got less than 20 minutes. Far away. Which one do you want to start with, sir?
Let's start with super moms.
Yeah.
So because of my page, I started it even early.
Please give your contact information. I apologize. I meant to ask that earlier.
Oh, no problem. If you go on Facebook, you can look at Follow the Data with Dr. Frank. There's a Facebook page for that. You can go on to MeWe, Follow the Data with Dr. Frank. And there's a YouTube page, Dr. Douglas G. Frank, and it also Follow the Data. So that's the best way to find me. And I think that works. So even remember early on in our conversation, you asked me, where do I get my data? Early on, I actually had covert people embedded throughout the country who were feeding me data. They were state officials, government officials who had access to data that were feeding it. So that's why one of the reasons why my numbers were so good at first. People were like, how do you do this? And of course, I wasn't giving away my sources, but that's one. But what's happened is there's like a following of women that have joined the page. And I call them super moms. These are amazing people. I was talking to a lady the other day. She's a judge. She's on the school, she's been a judge. She's on the school board. She's adopted 2 special needs children. She's a paramedic. She is on the PTA. You know, she does about 17 things. I think I work hard and that I have a lot of passion and energy. This woman puts me to shame. She's a super mom. Well, what's happened is dozens of these around the country that have been coming to my page to get information. It's like, Dr. Frank, can you explain to me about the flu thing? Because I'm going to my school board tomorrow, and I've got to give my presentation, and I'm trying to convince them not to do masks, or I'm trying to convince them to do this or that or the other thing. And so I've met all these amazing women who I call super moms. So that's who they are. I'm putting together a video right now that will probably be up today or tomorrow. I'm calling it the school primer for super moms. And basically I'm trying to keep it about 20 minutes where I go over the data that they need to understand and help them understand it, and then go over the arguments that they need to use with their school boards to keep their schools open. So that's who super moms are. I'm a huge fan. Amazing women. They put me to shame in terms of their passion and energy and devotion to our country. And I like making predictions. So on my page, I made a prediction back in October and pasted it big, bold American flag words across it. Super moms are going to save our country. Those women, they have their mama bear claws out. They're protecting their babies. They have the passion. They have the time. They have the access. Everybody listens to mom. So I think they're I don't think because people keep saying, okay, Dr. Frank, we agree with you. The data are messed up. Our governments are messed up. But I've been writing my congressman. I've been writing my senator. I've been writing the mayor. The governor, and nothing's happening. So what can we do? The answer is what you can do is you can find your local super moms and support them. Get them on the school boards. Get them as trustees of your communities. Get them as mayors and city, county commissioners. Work it up from the bottom. It works. I have multiple examples now where I've been able to help support at that level, and we actually make a difference in the state of Ohio. So that's who my super moms are. So I'm proud of our super moms and think that they're our salvation.
Cool. So
that's super moms.
We got super moms out of the road. Go ahead.
Okay, and then you asked about whack-a-mole. So what you have to realize is there's really only one mostly safe way to know where we stand in terms of COVID, and that's to look at deaths. You can't use cases to know where you stand because, as I explained earlier, how many cases you get or how many infections you get a day depends on how many tests you give, what kind of test, how you process the test. There are all these variables, and the government can manipulate those numbers to their ends. So you can't use cases to track, unfortunately. It'd be nice if it was an honest, controlled methodology, because then you could use cases to track, but you can't do that. You got to use something. You can't use hospitalizations because they love to present hospitalizations in terms of percent capacity numbers, and that's just bogus because they control the capacity numbers and they try to keep hospitals pretty full so they can be profitable. If they have a big empty wing, they just close it down. Now their capacity is less, so reporting it as a percent is hospitalizations are not the right way to do it either, because also they often don't distinguish between people that are there with COVID and people that because of complications due to COVID. So those numbers are not good either. The bottom line, the only really mostly safe way to know where we stand is to track deaths. And so you track the total number of deaths in the state, and you can look at the numbers that they assign to COVID, and that's somewhat useful. So why do I call it whack-a-mole? Well, from the very beginning, the numbers were pretty. In March, the numbers were pretty good. If they were off, they were off because everybody was new at reporting and there were inconsistencies. But that eventually stabilized. But then you remember in mid-April, the CDC changed the definition of what a COVID death was. So now, and they also changed the definition of what a COVID case was. So suddenly, all the numbers went haywire. So I had to get out my statistical whack-a-mole hammer and pound down all the lying with statistics that was going on. And then the next month in May, Ohio came out with a whole new way of reporting their data, which was completely statistically fallacious. So I had to get out my statistical whack-a-mole hammer and pound down all those lying with statistics situations. And so what happens is they keep moving from disaster to disaster. So you'll notice for a while it's asymptomatic transfer. Then it's, oh no, our kids are in trouble. Oh no, our schools are in trouble. Oh no, our hospitals are in trouble. They keep moving month to month. They move to new disasters. And I just have to keep getting out my COVID whack-a-mole hammer, my statistical hammer, and pounding down. So that's what I mean by statistical whack-a-mole.
Do you know Dr. Ken Hovind? He's got a whack-a-mole on his YouTube. That's I'm saying that. That's crazy.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it. Okay, Sweden.
Sweden took a different approach than us. I actually use Sweden on my webpage a lot to compare to Ohio because we have similar populations, about 10 million, and similar it's not they're not rural, and we're not, and there's enough mixture of kinds of communities, so they were comparable in some way. We have different forms of government. Mm-hmm. Sweden didn't. Sweden took a different approach. They took what's called herd immunity approach. They said protect the elderly, protect the vulnerable, and let's let it spread everywhere else. They thought that would be a safer way to do this than our way, which was to shut down. And they have something like 7,000 deaths in Sweden now. How many deaths do we have in Ohio? About 7,000. Guess what? It's come out about the same, hasn't it? But the difference is that they don't have people committing suicide every day because of the way they're treating them. They don't have a bunch of as many businesses going bankrupt because of irrational government policies on them. They don't have their hospitals and medical establishment devastated by silly government interventions. So now there's enough differences that I don't think, as a scientist, I could say that was a controlled experiment between Ohio and Sweden, and say, well, this way is better than that. So it's not that simple of a comparison, but that's why I like comparing to Sweden. It's they used a different approach than us, and they're about the same situation, about 7,000 deaths, same with us. And, in one case, they were more honest and transparent. In one case, they were less honest and less transparent. I prefer the honest and transparent approach.
I have to ask the question because it's how my mind works. We talked about the number of deaths total in the United States.
Yeah.
And it seems to be 20,000. If Ohio has 7,000, that's almost half of the deaths in the United States.
And I would say I use the number 7,000 because that's the official number.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
There's also something else going on with that. For example, in New York, they really had a big problem, right? I mean, New York really had a big epidemic, and it was bad, and they were losing people left and right, and their hospitals were filling up. Well, they needed to free up hospital beds in New York. So what did they do? They started moving those people out of the hospitals into elderly care facilities, congregate living facilities. But if you think about what that does, that puts your people who are most at risk, your elderly people, in direct contact with people who have COVID. And so they had massive numbers of deaths in rest home and elderly care, congregate care facilities because of their policy of taking people out of the hospital with COVID and putting them back into that environment. So there are a lot of extra deaths there because of bad strategy. And you can kind of forgive New York a little bit because they're in the middle of a horrible emergency. So you can forgive, when people at the beginning of an emergency, you can forgive some bad choices because everybody's under the gun and we're not sure what to do. And this is new for us and everybody's reacting differently. But after a month or two, everybody knew. I actually knew in January what the statistics were for every age demographic based upon my modeling. I already knew that our kids were safe. I already knew that the people who were in danger were our elderly people. I already knew that 15 out of every 16 person over 80 years old died of COVID, who did die of COVID, had a comorbidity, which is the reason they died of COVID, not from COVID. So I already knew that they were the ones that are in danger. And I wasn't alone. And the CDC published that. Johns Hopkins published that. The World Health Organization published that. That was public knowledge. We had no excuse to expose our elderly people to so much risk. The only reason we did that was because we had bad government leadership. And, you can forgive a few of those choices at the beginning because people were learning, but after a month or two, there's no more excuse. And we are still doing really, really stupid things right now, things we should know better. For example, we've traumatized our medical community and we have nurses that are quitting like crazy all around the country. They've been stressed out and they're leaving their jobs. They're leaving their careers. So we have a shortage of nurses. So you know what they're doing? and this is going to be a huge scandal. It's just coming out right now. They're taking nurses who have caught COVID in their course of their work, and they're putting them back in rest homes to care for elderly people. These are people who are known positives, but because we need nurses, we're putting them back into service.
Absolutely.
That's insane.
It's just
That's insane.
The whole thing is we shouldn't be surprised
exactly.
that we're going to have to let you go. And I think one of the reasons we're going to have to, by the way, Last Call Radio, folks, best kept secret in America. Stop that. We need to get out there and get exposure. Please tell your friends about us. I want you to realize that we just held a program with a statistician, and he's probably going to have to leave early today because he's in withdrawal. He didn't use one chart during the whole conversation.
I could have. I had a whole bunch of them ready.
I know you did, and I know you're going to have to go to therapy because of that. We're going to have you back. I enjoy you, and I'm sure we're going to talk off air soon.
Okay.
I need to connect up with people you're connecting up with, and you definitely need to connect up people I'm connecting up with, because that one of the things that we don't do is we don't unite the way we should unite.
You're right.
And that's part of that. By trade, I'm an executive recruiter. I'm a headhunter. So I'm the guy that should be doing all the networking here. And I don't mind doing that at all. I don't mind at all. Dr. Douglas G. Frank, follow the data. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Anderson, if you would, if you can put JP in there, Sears, and then I'm going to read the letter from one of our listeners, which is it's heartbreaking, but it's also very telling. Again, you're listening to Last Call, B.J. Edwards along with Mr. Anderson. We've been speaking to Dr. Douglas G. Frank from Ohio, by the way. And I'm proud of that. Made the right move. If you would.
Whoever controls the media controls the population. And that's us. We're the elite. We control the media, and therefore we control you. I can assure you, we the elite are not motivated by money. Even though there's just a few of us and we own nearly all of it, we're not motivated by money. We wouldn't stoop to that level. Money's a poor man's currency. We're motivated by control, specifically by controlling people. If you thought it was a thrill to make a bunch of money, just wait until you have control over a bunch of actual people. It's way more thrilling. Like, you know how you love your family and how you do anything for them? Yeah, well, that's how we feel about control. We love it. And we just want control over everyone and everything. Think about it this way. Have you ever been in a relationship with a really controlling person? You know how awful that can feel? So you can imagine how much better it feels to be the person who's doing the controlling in the relationship. So that's what we're trying to do in our relationship with everybody. We love being in control. It feels so good to us. That's why we make up rules to protect people. They clearly don't, because they're not designed to protect people. They're engineered to give us control over people. Like a 10 p.m. curfew, think about that. I can assure you that one's not because COVID's nocturnal. Do you know what the feeling's like knowing everyone's putting on a mask to cover their identity just to go into a store? And we're not even there, but they're doing it anyway? That's how much control we have over them. It's intoxicating. Some say it's kind of like playing God, but not true. It is playing God. In fact, it's actually more than playing God, because God doesn't control people. He gives them free will. We do control people, so I wonder if we could control God. Jerry, see if we can get God to go into quarantine. How do we control you? With fear. It's actually the only way we can control you. Are the masses of people scared of the virus or what the virus has done? No, even though they think they are. They're scared of what we've told them the virus is, what it has done, and what it will do. Essentially, we want to keep you scared 24/7, even while you sleep. So again, why do we want you scared? so we can control you, because we love control, not you. Getting people to willingly do things is controlling. It's great. But getting people to do things that are against their will is the G spot of control. It's exponentially more controlling. Then you're at a level of control where people are like, I want to have friends over, but I won't because I'm not supposed to. They're going against their own will, or they're like, I don't want to wear a mask. They don't do anything. But I'll put one on to go into the store so no one gets angry at me. They're doing what they themselves don't want to do, and we're doing it to them. You know, getting people to get injected with something is controlling. It's good. I'm not saying it's not. It's controlling. But getting people to get injected with something that they don't want to get injected with is so much more controlling. And that's what we're kind of doing here. Is this making sense to you? You picking up what I'm putting down? We also strengthen the venom of control circulating in people by getting them to do what they know is harmful to them. Like we tell people, sunlight kills the virus, so stay inside. And when they submit to that, even though they know what they're submitting to doesn't make any sense and is harmful to them, they're betraying themselves and becoming more loyal to us, which means we have more control over them than they do. And that's a win. And in the same vein, we also like to tell people, if you're overweight, you're at high risk. So we're going to close down all the gyms for your protection. And then they don't exercise. And the ace up our sleeve that people fall for all the time is we actually tell them human connection is bad for them. It's like telling a fish that water's bad for them. But the difference between fish and people is people will fall for it. So it's good. Another strategy that helps volumize the amount of control we have over people is we prey on the most scared people to get them to police the unscared people. Like, have you ever seen someone yelling at someone else for not wearing a mask? Or someone calling the authorities on a business that didn't shut down? Or someone reporting their neighbors because they had friends over? We're controlling them to control you. It's control squared. And I think it was Einstein who had the breakthrough equation, E equals mc squared. The C stands for controlled, the M is for masses, and the E is for elite. Elite equals masses controlled squared. Simple math. Now there's three things we must control in order to have complete control over you. Your thoughts, your words, and your actions. Controlling your actions. We're doing that. Wear a mask, shut your business down, stay in your home, stay 6 feet apart, etc. Controlling your words. Yeah, we're doing that. It's called censorship. We censor speech that speaks out against the scare tactics that we're using to control people. A nice side effect of this one is it's much easier to control people who don't know they're being controlled. That's why we don't let people talk about what we're doing when they recognize what we're doing. And controlling your thoughts. Yeah, we're doing that too. We control the media to control your thinking. Whoever controls the media controls the population. And that's us. We're the elite. We control the media, and therefore we control you. Controlling the media is how we censor your thinking, and therefore it's how we control your thinking. Because controlling your thinking shouldn't be left up to you. It should be left up to us, as we need to control your thoughts, words, and actions in order to have complete control over you. Because we love control. Will a heroin addict ever feel like they have enough heroin? Probably not. Will we ever feel like we have enough control over you? Probably not. So we'll gladly continue taking more control if you keep letting us.
I can't believe China's blaming the US for this whole virus thing.
What?
Yeah, I saw it on TV.
That's crazy, because you know it was the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up that led to this whole...
Thank you. Thank you. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there you find liberty. And that is the problem we have in America today. We have, man, have we ever mistreated our Creator? As a reaction, that is probably one of the most descriptive videos that I've ever seen in terms of what's going on in America today. And it leads in to a email I got from one of our regular listeners. And she starts off by saying, I don't even know where to begin. I go from emotions of anger, then peace, then back to anger. She's angry about what she considers to be a stolen election, COVID. It's extremely frustrating to listen to all this the past 24 hours or week. Extremely frustrating that no one has the answers. I'm angry that the Democrats can break every law and walk away with no consequences, while Republican doors are broken down, guns drawn, dragged to jail. I'm tired of communist news media lying on a daily basis. I cannot watch it anymore. I choose not to watch it anymore. I basically have turned it all off. No one seems to have a solution. How do we take our country back? And what do? We prayed. We voted. We did our civic duty, yet the Democrats don't even try to steal without blatantly shoving it down our throats, in our faces. And there's nothing seemingly that we can do about it. I feel like I went to bed in America and woke up in Russia, China. There's proof that the Democrats are in the Chinese pockets. What can we do about it? Not a thing. Do we go to war? Do we storm the White House and Congress and drag the traitors out? If this was George Washington's day, he would not have waited 4 years on this nonsense. He would have quickly done what you do to traitors and make examples of them all. I see history repeating itself. My mother was raised in Nazi Germany. She's told me enough stories that I know what I'm looking at. Hitler took over Germany so easily, the people were totally duped. Totally duped. You couldn't move without fear of your neighbor returning you in. Hello. My mother told me that her parents would listen to the radio very low in fear that their neighbor would hear and then turn them over to the Gestapo. Sound familiar? In some American states, if you see your neighbor walking without a mask or having too many people over, call your local police and then turn them in. Case in point, my friend's cousin went from Florida to New York to visit her son. She quarantined herself for a week in New York before seeing her family. But apparently that wasn't enough. Someone found out and turned her in. She was fined $2,000 from the state of New York. My great uncle in Germany was thrown into a concentration camp where he died. His crime? He spoke against Hitler in a pub. You have progressive officials threatening to get even with Trump supporters, telling their left-wing thugs to make them pay. Sound familiar? Hitler did the same thing. The Republicans in Washington aren't doing anything either. They're in bed with the Democrats. What's the answer? Are we to sit by and watch our republic being destroyed? I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. I never thought it would happen. I thought surely there's going to be a civil war. They're going to take back our country. I don't think that's going to happen. I have little hope that Trump can pull through and still keep his presidency for the next 4 years. If it happens, it's a miracle from God, and I'll add to this, undeserved. If it doesn't happen, I feel God's judgment will soon start. Or maybe that's what I'm feeling right now. How long could we expect God to sit by and watch the perversion in this country grow? Watch babies being slaughtered, the family being destroyed, and do nothing? How long could God sit back and watch demons in the pulpit, a church worshiping false idols, bringing Eastern mysticism, witchcraft into the church, and we expect God to do nothing? I watch in shock as I see what I've seen in videos, what the church leaders are doing. Such deception in the church. The church is sick to the core, and we think God is going to continue to bless our nation. Yes, I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm scared at times. I have no idea what to do, what to expect. No one has the answer other than trust the Lord. If Biden does get in, rather Obama gets in for his third term, the elites have what they have been waiting for, the takedown of America. I have friends in Israel and Africa who have feared for us, praying that Trump wins, as they know what if America does, what will happen. They will finally have their one world government. It may take a few years. You better believe it's on the horizon. The only thing we can do is get closer to the Lord as we've never been before. Witness to those who are lost, never stop speaking truth, and never stop praying. That's the only solution, at least in my humble opinion. It's going to get bad. Prepare for the worst. Pray for our protection. Perhaps God will look down on those who are faithful and give this country more time. We can only pray. End of email.
Join us next week for Last Call with BJ Edwards.